Hey everybody, it's Aaron at Warmouth, and I'm going to wax nostalgic this morning if you'll allow me. Back when I was a young lad in school, this would have been back in the mid to late 70s. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, and I went to Ustick Elementary. And I remember in 1976, it was the American Bicentennial, and international viewers stick around because this is going to come back to you. But I remember the American Bicentennial and the Freedom Train went all around the country. I remember going to that and seeing the little rounded star that was the official logo everywhere. And I remember the space shuttle taking its first test flights, piggybacked on the back of a 747. And it was a very hopeful time for me. And I remember Jimmy Carter made a promise to Americans that by 1980 we would be using the metric system. Well, and I also remember reading in Boy's Life about this exotic new sport that was catching on in America called soccer. Well, soccer caught on, but the metric system kind of bonked. It never really, it only mostly caught on. We never actually fully converted over to the metric system. I think mostly due to manufacturing concerns. All these companies would have to redo their tooling, and it was just going to be too expensive. And so we kind of landed in this place where we use half metric and half imperial. You still go buying a gallon of milk, but you buy a 2-liter thing of pop. So. Anyway, all this to say that Warmouth has to choose a lot of times between using a imperial measurement and a metric measurement. And a lot of times we choose the imperial because those dimensions become the name for something. For example, scale length on guitars, 25.5 inch has become the name for that feature, or 24.75 inch has become the name for that feature. And so we use that, even though we know a lot of international people look at our site, because those are the names for those things. Now, today, as the title of this video made clear, I'm going to talk about nut widths, and the same applies for nut widths. We still use imperial measurements for those things because those have become the name that a lot of people understand them by. 1 5/8, 1 11/16, 1 3/4, 1 7/8. Guitar players kind of understand and have those categorized just by their names. If you asked, if you just went up to a regular person and said, put those fractions in order from smallest to largest, they would go, let's see, I gotta find the common denominator, and then and you got to think about it. And then if you throw our other nut width in, 1.650, which is this like unholy marriage of imperial and metric units kind of jammed together, you put that in there and their minds explode. But we continue to use those because 1.650 or 1650 has become the name for that characteristic. And in case you don't know, the order from smallest to largest is 1 5/8, 1.650, 1 11/16, 1 3/4, 1 7/8 being the largest. So we spend a lot of time talking about like how do we want to present this on the website, and because those are the names, we've stuck with the imperial measurements, and then we put in millimeters what it is in millimeters afterwards, which I personally hate. It becomes this long kind of looks like an algebra formula where it's like 1-11/16 quote parentheses 4 parentheses, and it's just like this big number soup that I think is almost more confusing. For me and for all of our international customers, the easier way to think about it is just by their millimeter widths, and I don't remember them off the top of my head. I should have looked this up before shooting this video, but I think they are 42 millimeter, 43 millimeter, 44, 45, 46, I think. But when you think of them that way, it's much easier. You could give those to a first grader, and they could put them in order from smallest to largest. I wish Jimmy Carter's promise had come true, and that we were using the metric system, because it's so much easier to think of them that way. But it hasn't happened yet, so we're sticking with the imperial names for now. Going further, I wanted to talk about neck-back profiles. So we offer a bunch of them, and it's neck-back profiles is sort of like fret size. It's one of those things that's really hard to talk about in the video, because you can't see the difference between fret size or neck-back profile. All I can really do is tell you what I think, and that's only worth so much, because not everybody has my preferences. There's lots of different hand sizes, lots of different ways people like to hold the neck, lots of different ways people like to play the guitar. So me telling you my opinion doesn't matter that much. You really have to get it in your hands and experience it for yourself to decide what you like the best. But a lot of people ask for my preference, so I'm going to tell you. Standard thin is by far our most popular profile. I could play on a standard thin all the time and be totally happy. It's the one that's closest to Fender's modern C shape. And if you're in doubt if you have any doubt about where to start there with the standard thin. The fat back and the boat neck are huge. If you like huge necks, they're where you should look. But when I say they're huge, I'm not kidding around. They're huge. Especially the fat back. It is big and round, and it's an inch thick. The boat neck has the same thickness, but it's smaller in the shoulders. So if I had to choose between those two, I would go with the boat neck. For the smaller shoulders, you can get your hands around it easier. Our next most popular one after the standard thin is probably 59 round back, which is a nice meaty neck, but not as big as the boat neck or fat back. Still a little bit roundy in the shoulders for me, but a lot of people really like that neck. Then we have our two asymmetric profile necks, which are the Wolfgang and the SRV. The Wolfgang is a little bit smaller, and it is my favorite profile of all that we offer, because it's round and in the shoulders on the thumb side, but tapered on the finger side, and so it's easier to get your fingers around, but you still have the meatiness of a thicker neck in the palm of your hand. The SRV is the same way, but just a little bit bigger. And then, the Clapton. The Clapton is a V profile, which I don't like. I'm not a fan of V profile necks, really, but a lot of people like them. And then the last one we have is the Wizard, which is real thin. It's our thinnest profile. Kind of has the association with shred playing. A lot of shredders use those thin necks, but don't let that throw you off. If you think you like a thin neck, a lot of people use it for all kinds of playing that don't have anything to do with shred. So if you think you would like a thin neck, go for it. The last thing I will say is, when you're trying to select which neck size works for you, remember that the neck profile, the neck back profile, and the nut width are inextricably linked. If you change one, you're going to change if you change the nut width, you're going to change the way the neck feels. For example, like a 59 round back with a 1/11/16 nut width is too big for me, for my preference. But with a 1 5/8 nut width, I feel like it's manageable, because I can still get my hand around it pretty good. So, when you're thinking about which neck back profile to choose, always keep in mind the nut width you're going to choose, because one does have a pretty big effect on the other. So anyway, thanks for coming along with me on my trip through yesteryear. I hope you found all that information useful. As always, if you have any comments, if you have any questions, suggestions, if you want to make fun of me for one or more of any various reasons, put it in the comments. I read them all. I laugh, I cry, and I keep a document at work called Hall of Fame of Social, what do I call it? social media put down Hall of Fame, where I put all my most scathing criticisms. I usually delete them off of Facebook, but I do preserve them. I guess it's just my way of dealing with the pain. But anyway, that's it for today. And as always, until next time, wash your hands, be kind, and keep on picking.